We want to bring you a message about the characteristics of pilgrims. The characteristics of pilgrims. How do you see yourself? When we see ourselves as Christians, we ought to see ourselves as pilgrims and strangers going through this foreign land. This earth is not our home. We're just passing through. This earth is not ours. Now, I've talked to so many people down through the years. And one of the things that I've seen is we get too attached to this world. You know, we use the saying that it's mine. You know, the things in my house is mine. My house is mine. My car is mine. And that might be to certain extents of things, but I've always been raised to believe that everything that we have, we own more or less, is God's. And God is letting us use it as a temporal thing. Now, again, this is me. I don't expect any of you listening to this go through the same thing. I crack up whenever you see these movies now on our DVD player, and they say the views of these, what's going to happen is not necessarily related to this company that's doing this. Sometimes I wonder if I should say the same thing, you know. My views are not everybody else's views. My opinions, in other words, ain't everybody else's opinions. It's just mine, and I have learned that we all see things in a whole different atmosphere or viewpoint. In Hebrews chapter 11, verse 13 is the foundation verse. If you have your Bibles, go there. Hebrews 11, 13. It says, "These all died in faith." Now, Hebrews 11 is the center point of the book. It is the cornerstone of the book, you could say. Because in this chapter, it gives you from Abel on of the people that had pure faith, if we could say pure faith toward God. And it gave us example after example after example of these people who were named that had faith. Now notice, Abel was not a Jew. He was not from any tribe of Israel, because Israel didn't exist until after Abraham. Abraham, technically, God called him the first Jew, or the first Israeli. And from Adam on up to then, there was no Jewish country, there was no Israel, there was no nothing till Abraham. They were all, you could say, Gentiles. Okay? These all died in faith, having not received the promises, but having seen them afar off, and were persuaded of them, and embraced them, and confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on earth. Notice this. First point, they all died in faith. And was it 162, we sing that song, Living by Faith. That is how we're supposed to live, by faith. We have this thing upon this earth, and it's a carnal viewpoint. We say, seeing is believing. If we do not see it, we do not believe it. Then how does a blind man see? Blind man has no sight. He can't see what you see. He has to hear. He has to feel. He has to touch. He has to use his other senses. He cannot see. Or a blind woman, she cannot see. So how do you expect them to see when they can't see? A Christian has to believe. Believing is seeing. These men and women here found in this chapter had their faith so strong, their faith was their sight. Their faith was their sight. Not having received the promises. Now, these people walked this way and they did not receive the promises. We didn't get the promises until Jesus came. Jesus was the promises. He was the one that opened the door to all the promises. But having seen them afar off, they seen them way off and they seen it coming and they rejoiced. If you could get the prophets, all the major and minor prophets together today, here, right now, in this century, at this time, this day, and they could see the world, the global world as it is, every single one of them would be rejoicing of what they saw back in their time, because what they seen then was here today. And they could see this. And you talk about them walking in a heavenly places, they wouldn't even come down. They would be so glorifying God. We've seen this. We could see this from afar off. We knew this is going to happen. We told you and you didn't believe it. About 200 years ago, our founding fathers told us about the Democratic Party and what's going to happen, about what's in this land today. Whether this generation believes it or whether it don't, what they said is coming to pass and has come to pass right now. And for us who are believers, who are strong disciples, followers of the Lord, we see these things here. It's not coming. It's here right now. Having seen them afar off, they were persuaded of them. This word persuaded here means it drove them. It led them. It guided them. And they embraced it. Embraced them. They embraced these things. They knew it. They kept it. They talked about it. And we know that they talked about it because we read it in the Bible, of like in Jeremiah providing these things in chapter 5, talking about these things, chapter 3, talking about all these things coming, and we see this here right now. They embrace them as fact. They embrace them as truth and confess them. And they confessed that they were strangers and pilgrims on earth. They confessed. They boldly said, you know what? We're not, this earth ain't ours. 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 11 and following. Dearly beloved, I beseech you as pilgrims and strangers, abstain from fleshly lust, which war against the spirit, which war against the soul, having your confessions honest among the Gentiles, that whereas they speak against you as evildoers, they may by your good works, which they shall behold your glory, God in the day of vision, or God in the day of visitation, submit yourselves to every ordinance of man for the Lord's sake, whether it be to the king as supreme, or unto governors as unto them that are sent by him for the punishment of evildoers, and for the praise of them that do well. For so is the will of God that for this will of God, for so is the will of God with that when that with well doing he might put to silence of the ignorance of the foolish of men, as free and not using your liberty for a cloak of maliceness, but as servants, the servants of God. Now, here's the reason why we ought to do these things. We are the servants of God. We are free. We are free by God, not by man. And that's what the Constitution keeps saying to us. We are free men. We are free to worship the Lord. And if we let this party come and take away our constitutional rights, we are a third world country. We are no different than a third world country right now. Number one, obey the call. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 8. By faith, Abraham, when he was called to go into a place which he should after receive for the inheritance, obeyed, and he went out, not knowing whither he went. There are so many times in my life where I don't know what I'm doing. I know not where I'm going. People come up to me and tell me, where are you going to go? What are you going to do? And I have this like a vision thing, you know, what happens if job was lost or whatever. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? And you go look at people and say, I'm going to trust in God. I'm going to let Him guide me. And they just sit there with a puzzled look on your face. Here, Abraham was one of the first, you could say, in the book of Genesis that had this happen to him. God did not tell him where he was going. He had no clue. I heard a preacher and evangelist say this, and it is downright to the point. And they said that his family and friends and everything asked him, where are you going? I don't know. How are you going? What happened? He said, I heard a voice. What did that voice say? Go. So I'm going. He heard a voice. He heard from God, and he said, go. God just said, go. And Abraham went. He left. And when he got in the center, when he got in the center point, you could say cornerstone. When God got him in that place, in the center point, what did he say? He said, stop. Look to the north, east, west, south. I will give to you and your descendants this land. If you was to go to Genesis chapter 15 and you would read the circumference of Israel, and you go to the map of Israel right now and you lay it over, you could see what God promised these people. That land is bigger than what Israel has right now. Number two, never settle down. Never settle down. That is a great sin or a misfortune we have. We settle down. We settle down with the things around us. Our house on a lot. Our things. We just become satisfied with this. Hebrews chapter 11 verse 9. By faith he sojourned in the land of promise, as in a strange country, dwelling in tabernacles with Isaac and Jacob, and heirs with him of the same promise. So now Abraham, by faith, sojourning in the land of promise, and in a strange country. He was in a strange country. Are we not in a strange country? This country, the reason why it's strange is we're a bunch of hypocrites. I shouldn't say we. America has become a bunch of hypocrites. They say they're a Christian country. But why can't we worship the Lord? Why can't we have fellowship in worshiping the Lord? And what I mean by that is, why can't we pray? Why is the church houses today filled with revival, but not in prayer? When I was a boy growing up, the key secret to having a revival was the prayer life of the people. Before we had a revival, we would meet and have a week's worth of prayer. A week's worth of prayer to the average church today is 2 to 3 days. The average revival is 2 or 3 days. How many people pray in their homes? I mean, have a prayer service in homes. I remember we would come out to the church and we would sing 2 songs. We'd gather around the altar and we would pray in a space of time longer than the songs were. I remember when we come out on Saturday mornings or visitations, and we would meet and we would have 2 songs sung. And then we would pray for those we would go out and visit. We would dismiss and we spend the day visitating, trying to get people to come to church Sunday morning. Where is that in the churches today? Where is that in the homes today? It seems like you can preach till you're blue in the face and people still don't get it. That's how they did it back then. Well, you check what happened back then and compare it to what we have now, and you see a great decrease, not an increase. You see a great misfortune happen. They dwelled in tabernacles, tents or whatever, with Isaac, Jacob, and the heirs with them of the same promise, looking for an eternal city. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 10. For he looked for a city which had foundations, whose builder and maker is God. If God can't build it, it can't be built. If God can't make it, it can't be made. If the watcher watches and God's not in the city, he watches in vain. For he looked for a city which had foundations. Now, this foundation was eternal foundations because of the builder and maker, who was God. He had a telescope vision. How many of us have telescope visions? See things far off. coming. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 13. Through faith also Sarah herself received strength and conceived seed, and was delivered of a child when she was past age, because she judged him faithful who had promised. Now here she was afar off as far as having a child, and yet God turned back the clock, if you could say, and she conceived when she was, 90 years old or something like that. Abraham was about 100 when he had the promised child. And God told him this when he was around 75. Now notice, God told him this is going to happen when he was 75 years old. 25 years later, it comes to pass. There's a 25-year gap in the process. God will tell us things, and it will not be in our time of what we think. And we go out and we just try to do it on our own, and we mess up like Abraham here did. My Aunt Susie would always tell me this. She said, Larry, always remember, your time ain't God's time. And it's true. God has given me two things here recently in my few years. When I prayed, God said, I'm going to turn your life around in April. He didn't tell me what year. So I go out and I'm thinking it's April, God's going to turn it, and it doesn't happen. And all from that year on, it just didn't happen. This past April, God turned everything around. It started happening. God gave a man a vision not too long ago. And he said, in May, things are going to come out and the media won't be able to stop it. Well, we thought it was last year. Didn't happen. This year in May, look at what's happening. God never reveals things for as we think. I mean, our timing ain't God's timing. And God will tell us things, and He gives us things that we might trust Him, because He cannot lie to us. He will not lie to us. It's not God to lie. It is not in Him to lie. So when He tells us something, we ought to hold it to truth. It's going to come to pass. It's not going to pass when I think it is. It's going to pass when He says it is. The acknowledgement of their faith. Hebrews 11:13 again. Through faith, also Sarah herself receiving strength to conceive seed. Notice this. Through faith, she received the strength to conceive the seed. She knew God was faithful. Never turning back. Number 6, never turning back. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 15. And truly, if they had been mindful of that country from whence they came out, they might have had opportunity to had returned. Now notice this. And truly, it says, if they had been mindful of that country from whence they have come out, they had made opportunity to have returned. That was the big downfall to the Hebrews when they had left Israel, or when they had left Egypt. When they left Egypt and they ran around in the desert for 40 years, that was their biggest problem. They could see Egypt as home. They could see Egypt as their dwelling, their place to settle down. They wanted to go back to Egypt. They didn't have faith in God that Moses was rose up to lead them to the promised land. The promised land was their home. They should have had fixed upon their home. In this generation that I have found, the Christians are so focused upon this country, this world, they have lost sight of the New Jerusalem, where in their dwelling places, that is their home. This place is our home for a season. We live here for 70 years, 80, 90 years, and that's it. We're going to leave. But there in the New Jerusalem, we will dwell there forever, for all eternity. You will not go by your neighbor's house or a neighbor in the other community and have a for sale sign upon that house. They will not be moving out of that house and going somewhere else. You'll never see that in the New Jerusalem. You will not see that even on the new earth where the Hebrews will dwell. They will dwell there and they will make their land their own, their place their own, and you'll never see them move. It will be there. What is the secret to that? Because there will be one endless day. That day has no name. It has no end to it. It doesn't go like we do down here. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. It doesn't do that. You have one endless day. Period. It will go on and on and on forever. Your mind can't comprehend that. Now, can it? So it never turns back. We are never to turn back, but to keep going forward. Long for a better land. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 16. But now they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly. Wherefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he hath prepared for them a city. And finally, in closing, number 8, died in their faith. Died in their faith. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 13. Through faith, also Sarah herself received strength to conceive the seed, and was delivered of a child when she is past the age, being judged him faithful who had promised. And there they heard Abraham died later on, knowing that God made them a promise and had kept the promise, had made the promise come full bloom. When they seen Isaac, they seen the promise of God, and that God did not fail them. God was faithful to the end. And that is what we have today as believers. We have God who has made us a promise, who has kept the promise, and is faithful to the promise to the end. And I hope that you've heard this, and that you've heard the voice of the Lord through this, and you'll continue as pilgrims and strangers through this land, and we will not give up until we see that promise on the other side of Jordan. It's our prayer in his blessed name.